Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's second Friday food, wine, and travel show with the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. We do this show every second Friday and every second Tuesday. Second Tuesday is dedicated to destinations, and every second Friday is dedicated to the travel writers that are members of the organization. And you can go to their website, ifwtwa.org. Normally, we're talking about where the writers have just been or where they're going and catching up with all their adventures. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about World War II and historic sites in the Southeast of America. And it is, Veterans Day, so we want to pay our dues and respects and also learn more. And these historic sites are definitely places you want to visit. And we're going to talk about three places with Kathleen Walls. Kathleen has been on our shows talking about Florida mostly and the Southeast. That's where she travels. She's a travel writer. She is a photographer and quite a prolific author as well. She was born and raised in New Orleans, but lives in Florida. She made it through Hurricane Ian, so don't mess with her. You can follow her on her website, AmericanRoads.net. And also her story about these three different sites is up on blendradioandtv.com in our history department. So welcome back, Kathleen. How are you?
I'm great, Lisa. How are you?
Oh, doing good, doing good. I'm so glad you're on the show. Nancy and I are so glad about that, and so glad you made it through the hurricane okay. It's the thing. Now we have to kind of go and, as travel writers, we're recording this right after the hurricane. It's kind of like now we what do we do with all our, what can we do for these areas? Are they ready for us to help them to get tourism back? Are they ready for tourism? It's kind of an odd thing always for us as writers to, now navigate what can we do? I think that's a role we play, right?
You're right, Lisa. And the CVB people are really good in some cases. St. Augustine, which is very close to me, had just sent an email saying they're back up and running and welcoming visitors. And even our local news had from Visit Florida that Florida's ready for tourism again. We have some places, I wouldn't advise anybody going to Fort Myers right now or obviously Sanibel Island. But other places, they're back up and running. I have a piece that's coming out as Halloween, has to do with the haunted hotels, and one of them is St. Augustine, which I'm glad that I'm able to give them a little bit of promotion there.
Awesome. And I think Florida's resilient, but it was a hard one. And we just, as travelers too need to, it's just, it's a different time, but travel is back. And yet we still have to have this extra patience, with service and how things are going, because it's still not, back to normal as as we say.
No, it's still very different. Mm-hmm. Each of the destinations is meeting it in different ways. You still have to worry about the virus a bit. Maybe not as much as we did before if we've been sensible and gotten vaccinated, but it's still out there. And the loss of the labor shortage is really hurting a lot of places. Restaurants especially are not able to keep the regular hours that they used to keep.
And and understaffed, hotels, restaurants, understaffed. And so we just have some patience. But today, normally we're talking about, kayaking with alligators with you. I love our chats with you because you get into the swamps. Like Nancy and I get into the swamps. We love the swamps. And since our last conversation, Nancy and I have done a lot of Florida adventures, St. Mark's. We went to Wakula Springs, where
that's a wonderful
Tarzan
place.
was filmed. Yeah, wonderful park.
Right, and they have the costume there for the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the original costume, because that was filmed there also.
That was, and that's where that isn't it? It's like the longest spring, like the deepest spring, freshwater spring.
It could be. It's very big, and their boat tour is fantastic. With the amount of wild birds you'll see, the herons and the egrets and gators and turtles and limpets even.
Yeah, and
they're all
snakes.
over everything.
Snakes.
And snakes.
You got to see the water snakes. I love the water snakes.
I'm good with snakes.
What about Okefenokee Swamp? Have you been there?
Not too long ago, yes, I did a camping trip there with a van. The van turned out to be a nightmare. I bought it from some very weaselly lying car dealer.
Oh, I
who
remember
told
you
me,
getting the van. Oh,
yes,
yeah.
he would have sold it to his mother. When I finally took it to my mechanic, he said he doesn't think too much of his mother. So I sold it, and I have a little tiny pop-up that I use sometimes when I'm traveling.
Oh,
I still do a
I
little
love
camping.
that. Well, we thought of you when we went there. We did that twice last year and absolutely loved it. It was a dream of mine since I was a little kid. Here I was in Africa, doing all those parks and, the big wildlife and everything. And my dream was to go
Yeah.
to Okefenokee. And I finally got there and I love it and watched a alligator chomp down on a turtle. Walked by a lot of
Ouch.
like they're so close.
I
Yeah, I know, but the history is so
I
cool.
kayaked there. Mm-hmm.
Did you
It is.
kayak in there?
It's beautiful. Yes, I did. I didn't go too far because I was by myself. I took the boat tour. I wanted to go out to Billy's Island, but I didn't quite make it
Me
that far.
too.
But I did kayak a bit out. Did you get to Billy's
Oh,
Island?
no, we didn't. We went more on the National Wildlife Refuge side and that side, and they've got this boardwalk you can do to a watchtower, and that's where we saw this really big alligator. I mean, I filmed it, and you can hear him chomp. You can hear his teeth on the shell.
Ouch.
But you walk over the boardwalk, and there's alligators that will come underneath the boardwalk, like they're right there next to you, kind of like the
Oh,
Everglades.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I was like, the only thing is I haven't seen any snakes. I'm all into water snakes, and then I looked down,
The
and
only
there's
kind
this.
I don't like is the cottonmouth.
Excuse me. Well, that's what I saw was a cottonmouth. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, it's like a rattlesnake. I lived in the Southwest, and I'm like, that's like a rattlesnake, but it's not a
Yeah.
rattlesnake. What is that? And then, like, I'm bending down to get the photo, and the photo's not working because there's grass moving, and I'm like, if I move this angle, I can get it. And then he gave me that look that if I do one more move, he's gonna get me. So I managed to get away from
And
him.
they can be mean little snakes too.
Yeah.
And they
Well,
blend in. Their coloring so close it blends in. With the water, the brownish speckly look, and you
yeah.
just don't see them.
Well, I know, you see, we've totally got off topic, but I can't help it. You're on the show, and we always talk about alligators and swamps and things. And this is what, you do as a travel writer and photographer. But
Right.
when you think about World War II, so I'm getting back on track, but this is an
Right.
important part
That's
of
what
it.
we're supposed to be talking about.
I
Right.
know, but World War II, I want to go to New Orleans, the one
Oh,
museum, and
yes.
I've heard about this National World War II Museum in New Orleans. So we don't think about World War II being on our turf, really. And I think one of them is also the World War II Homefront Museum on St. Simon's Island in Georgia.
Right.
And
That's a very different one.
very different. But when you think about wars being fought in the Southeast, when we're talking about gators and snakes, so this is my segue. Don't you think you've got to even like the Battle of New Orleans, like being out in the swamps, like fighting the British, back in those, I mean, that's the different war, but
Right. But they had
out
to
in
deal
the
with snakes and wildlife too, yes. And it probably was a
know.
lot more of it. I mean, we've wiped out so many different species, even complete species, and tons of the ones that we still have been wiped out. So those days, those guys probably had tons of them around.
I know. So that's like a whole other deal, in a war, you're also dealing with all this wildlife and animals. And like, if you're fighting on a ship, and then like there's sharks right there. If you get tossed over, it's not like you just tossed over. You've got sharks to contend with. So that I just want to say the Southeast and in any kind of battling stuff is wild. But New Orleans, tell us about this, because this New Orleans, you always think you're going to get most of the history of, New Orleans and the
Right.
Battle of New Orleans and No Man's Land, and and there's so much history, and you're from New Orleans, and the
Right.
Jefferson Highway ends in New Orleans. That goes America's very first vacation route. It's the Pines to Palms Highway, or Palms to Pine Highway, whichever way you want to look at it, that goes from Winnipeg, Canada to New Orleans, and it's reviving now.
Mhm.
We have a show just on it. But anyway,
I had
New
not
Orleans
seen the
is,
show.
oh yeah, I'll send you links to it. Yeah, because it ends in New Orleans. This was started in 1915 by the editor and publisher of Better Homes and Gardens, because he knew they needed to have a route from Canada down to the south because of the way the weather is for up north. They want to come south.
Yeah, they want to come
And
south.
vice versa. So they started it. So it's a revival right now, which is so exciting. But so I want to put this is like something they put on the map. Like if you're traveling that route or everybody goes to New Orleans and thinks Mardi Gras and all that fun stuff, but the history is
But
really
there's so much more. Oh, yes.
Tell
And
us
this
about
museum,
this museum. Yeah.
it's a relatively new. Now, by new in New Orleans, anything that's under 100 years old is new. And this is, well, I don't really remember the exact date, but I'd say maybe 25 or so years, and I'm not sure on that date, but it's relatively new compared to places like the Presbyterian and the Cabildo and things like that. And it is the national World War II museum, and it is one of the biggest that I've been to related to World War II. It has everything there. They have a show, IMAX show, and when I went, I made the mistake of not reserving ahead of time and did not get to see the show, the movie, but they show movies related to it. And there are so many different exhibits. It follows everything from women's parts in the war, because our role those days was very different from what we are today. And nobody thought of women in war, but the museum recognizes that women were a big part of that war.
Yeah.
And
yeah, they were.
So much. They begin with how someone would have taken a bus from, home to where they were going to their base, and follows the whole thing through the two things that really stood out for me was the Enigma machine. For a couple of reasons.
That's
right.
This is a crazy story. Yeah.
It is. It is really crazy. A couple of crazy twists to it. One thing, the Enigma, the Germans invented it and thought it was pretty much unbreakable. It was a code machine, and it was almost like a relative or early ancestor, if you will, of the computer. And the Germans, by World War II, they had perfected it, so they felt it was pretty much, safe and that nobody could ever break it, and that was it. Well, the gentleman who really was the one who kind of ended up breaking the thing was a gay man, and at that time he was an Englishman, and Alan Turing was his name. He was a scientist, brilliant man. But once the English government found out that he was gay, they tried to force him into treatment, supposedly, and he ended up committing suicide, which is so sad.
Wow.
But he's really considered the father of computer science, because this was kind of the beginnings of science, computer science.
Computer science. So this is the beginning of our big computers, our actual.
And when you see the exhibit, it almost looks like a very old-fashioned typewriter. But apparently, and I'm not really an expert at this, but I'm sure the Germans had a gear that, you would hit one key and it maybe type something different. But it was a code that was, just like we encode things and encrypt things on computers today. Basically, I guess that's what they were doing. So it was a very detailed machine for its time. And the other one that really, really gets to me was New Orleans, and the ship. When I lived in New Orleans, the shipyard was already there. Higgins Shipyard was still there. It was run by an Irishman, and he helped develop a special kind of a boat that could load the jeeps on, and then get them off very quickly and safely when they were trying to embark them on beaches during the war. So that was big, but there's just so much in there. It's just, you could spend days. And another thing, which of course we've moved so far away from today, and when we go to the grocery, many of us might wish we were back, is the victory gardens. Roosevelt said that was one of the things that helped win the war. Everybody those days planted a little garden to help and, grew their own vegetables.
But that's something too, I think that, New Orleans is really good at that too. I've always thought that everyone in the South always kind of grew things, tomatoes, and I don't know if it's just the way it is. I don't know. But,
not nowadays.
Nowadays,
New Orleans, in the French Quarter, everything is so crowded, there's no room to grow things. But you move out into the suburbs and things, and it's just like everywhere else is.
Oh yeah.
The average middle class homes with a nice little yard, but mom and daddy are working and kids are going to school, and nobody's there to take care of a garden.
Well, I always look at the thing of going and working with farmers and local farmers and the CSAs and farmers markets. And I always say that even when we travel, we should really look at that. We shouldn't ignore farmers markets as part of our footprint of where we're going. You get to learn more about an area from a farmer. What grows
and
there.
The food. To me, grocery tomatoes aren't worth eating. I mean, I'm old enough that I remember when you used to get real tomatoes, but now, the only way you're going to get them is some local farmer growing something that they haven't hybridized so well that it can ship forever and not turn, not go bad, but it's lost its taste. It's a compromise. They can ship it all over the world, but what good is that going to do if it doesn't taste any good?
Yeah, right. Right. I totally agree with you. The Victory Garden, I always thought that was an important part of the White House, the Victory Garden, because it showed some strength and it also showed women's side of it too, because a lot of women were doing the Victory Gardens
because
too.
This was the women left at home, and that's what Roosevelt was asking. Everybody grow some veggies because we don't have enough food to ship over and feed the soldiers, and so many of the farmers were over there fighting. There was, everybody was just sort of depending on producing their own food, which brings us into the St. Simon's Museum a lot.
Yeah.
That's one of the really neat exhibits in there, and it's interactive, so even a kid can get in there. And suppose you had a ration book, which was, those days you couldn't just go in the grocery and say, oh, I want to buy this, I want to buy that. You had so many ration coupons. And when you ran out of coupons, all the money in the world wasn't going to buy you any food because the grocery was only allowed to sell you what you had ration coupons for. So this exhibit in there, it shows what you could use a coupon for, how much this would buy and how much that would buy. It's a whole different way of life.
That really kind of brings it home to you. I you know what? I remember those kind of coupon books, like when we lived in South Africa. I don't know if it was because of the drought that there was kind of a rationing thing at one point. I don't know, but then it wasn't like a ration, but there was something going on, and I think it was the drought actually, because the drought, even if you went to a hotel, you had to pay a deposit for a bath plug, so they knew you were using water, and you were only allowed to use it at a certain point. So you had lines on the bathtub. Like if you're going to take a bath, they know you're doing it. That was years ago. But this is the kind of thing we forget about, right? We're going to go to McDonald's because it's easy and quick, Yeah.
And you walk in a grocery and you don't stop and think, you do to the extent of how much money do I have. But that, you don't stop and think, I'm limited. I can only buy so much. We saw a tiny little bit of that, like with toilet paper and some items during COVID, where groceries, at least here, would have signs up no more than 2 items per customer. Mm-hmm. But this was not only with just things like that, it was everything.
Exactly.
You got so many coupons that you could buy shoes, so many coupons that you could buy clothes, whatever you needed, and especially, shoes and things that use rubber or leather, things like that were being used for the war effort. They needed them, to build tires for the Jeeps and things.
When this one at St. Simon's Island is in Georgia, and we've not made it there yet. We got close. I think it's Brunswick.
You need to.
Brunswick is near there, right?
Islands. Brunswick is where you that's the mainland point. From there's bridges to Cumberland, there's a bridge to Jekyll, and there's a bridge. St. Simon's it's a hard toss-up for me between St. Simon's and Cumberland as to which is a favorite. Jekyll is very interesting. All three are interesting. Cumberland you can only get to by ferry. There's no bridge. And it's perfectly wild. It's unbelievable. A whole different story.
Yeah, I haven't done the ferries.
St. Simon's, definitely do it. Make a reservation ahead, though, when you do it.
Oh, okay.
Good tip. When you're on Cumberland, there's no transportation. You can rent a bicycle or you can pay a little extra and bring a bicycle over, but there's no cars. There is a tour, and I highly recommend it, Legacy Tours. And the guide is very knowledgeable. He gives you complete history of each of the places you visit, because you're like, I think it's 14 miles to the end of the island, which was where JFK Jr. got married, at the African American church on that end.
Oh, wow.
But from when you get off the ferry, how many people are going to walk or even bicycle 14 miles? So by taking the tour, they have a Jeep that a van that takes you down there. And it's quite an experience.
Wow.
But Cumberland, of course, you can drive to, and it's very civilized, but it has an awful lot of history. And the thing that's so interesting about that museum is that they bring it in. It's not about, what happened in Berlin or what happened in Paris. It's about what happened right here on the Gulf shores of the United States. And I hadn't even realized this, but there was a submarine, a German submarine, that sank an American boat right off of there. It was a private, it wasn't a military boat. It was the Esco Baton Rouge boat, was sank right 13 miles off St. Simon's Island by a German U-boat. And we never think about 22 sailors died in that sinking, and there was some rescue by the Coast Guard. But the museum, it's not as big as, it's a relatively small museum. It's housed in, I believe, the former Coast Guard building that was there. So the building is pretty old, and it tells the story of that part of the war. And even the King and Prince, which is the big resort, which is really nice to stay at. It dates back to the 1930s, I believe. But during the war, it shut down as a hotel and was the housing for officers and people working on radar, which was new then. And the museum talks too about the radar. And the cafeteria, the restaurant in the hotel, King and Prince, is named Echo, ECOHO, capitals, because that's what radar is. It's an echo off of an object, like a radio beam, and then it echoes back, and that's, we just take it for granted now. But the museum also talks, but the hotel is connected in that history with the war too, because they were the base, the home base for the people working on radar at that point from St. Simon's Island.
That's amazing, because you forget about the whole radar thing. You really do.
Right, you just take it for granted. It's,
Yeah. Vietnam, they really started that's where it really started to be well used, right? It started there. I totally forgot. And you've got to think World War I, World War II, Florida's coastline.
Well, they were just beginning with it then, and it was a new thing at that time. And it was a big factor in the war, because that's how they tracked and knew where these German submarines were. If the ships, the planes were coming in, they could spot them with radar, which World War I, they didn't have that.
I just find it fascinating about the Southeast being so connected to World War II history. And then earlier this year, we were up in the Pacific Northwest. And then here comes all this World War II history with memorials on the ocean side, with all these memorials. And I couldn't believe it. Oh my gosh. It was like, I was like, oh yeah, you're in the Pacific Theater. You are, because you're up in Washington State, Northern California, like Trinidad, all the way up. And so you see, these pieces of submarines that were blown up and things, and it's like, wow, this washed ashore.
I didn't get to see that.
Yeah, that was in Crescent
that would be
City,
fascinating too. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was just recently in Washington at Bainbridge Island, and that was the first place where the Japanese were excluded and sent off to, let's face it, concentration camps, whatever we want to call them, but that's what they were. And the person that led our tour and told us the story was a lady named Lily, and she had been 7 years old, and she was one of the people that was sent off with her family to this camp. And hearing the story from her and marching around that memorial wall was fascinating. It's just
Arizona had a bunch too, like not just Arizona, but up
everywhere.
Yeah, Manzanar is part of our National Park Service site.
Yeah.
Manzanar out on the other side of Yosemite.
Right, and this is
Highway
connected
395.
with the people, because some of them, I don't remember now where they were sent to first, but then some of them later were transferred to that one.
Manzanar was like, I think, a very
Yeah.
prolific. We haven't had the chance to tour and really do it, but I've been there, stopped, and like it's just because we always had a carload of like you can't just you can't be traveling across the country and leave your car full of all your gear, and go and ignore it. So we always have to kind of balance this, how we do things. We have to be stopped somewhere properly, and all of that. But yeah, it's really interesting how the different parts of the country worked in regards to World War II. Like in Central California, we've actually been on a gentleman's farm, Farmer Bob, and he does orange. He's a citrus farmer, and he's actually opened a nonprofit where people can go on a tractor tour and learn about growing citrus. But on his family farm, we stayed there for a few weeks, like a week, I think, actually, years ago. And part of the farm has watchtowers in Central California, in the heartland of the Delta, like not on the coast, but they had watchtowers there. I mean, that's just mind blowing when you think the effect of World War II and World War I. Everybody really, that freaked everybody out, and nobody thought World War II would really happen. It did, and then when it ended, everybody's like, okay, and hopefully talking about
The
this.
war to end all wars, and yet we're still at war.
Yeah, look at us. We're still at war, and it's teetering a little close to my preference here of what's going on in the world. So I think that's
it's
this
a little
role.
Scary.
It is scary, and this role.
When you think about it, with the parallels with Hitler and Putin, it's really scary because Hitler did that too. Take this one country, and keep taking until people stepped in to stop him. And it's like, should we step in or should we not? I mean, I can see both sides of that one.
Yeah, it's hard because there's things tied.
Because we don't know. I mean, nobody. Yeah, and the same thing with Hitler. I guess everybody in the beginning started thinking, well, we'll let him take that country, and then maybe he'll be satisfied and quit. We don't want to go to war. But what happens, like that famous letter about the guy who said, when they came for the Unionists, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a socialist or unionist. And when they came for the Jews, I didn't say anything. But then when they came for me, there was no one to speak for me. And that's, boy, is that a true thing today? Could that happen? Did we know?
Yeah.
Could we? Maybe.
Well, I think we should never take anything for granted. And I think when you go to museums, like in these historic sites with these artifacts and things that are so personable, you start to really realize, like the ration books, I think that gets to everybody to understand, because that's something like, hey, I can only have like this piece of bread today. I can't have that again tomorrow.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So it really hits home to what war does,
Yeah.
Heritage
and
Park
even like
veteran. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, that leads into Heritage Park Veterans Museum, because that was their side of the story. It's a small museum, but it's telling it from the people's point of view.
This
One
is
of
in
the
Georgia
exhibits
too.
in there. This is in Georgia, Henry County, Georgia. Near Stockbridge, near the racetrack, the big racetrack there. And one of the little bitty thing, it's a maternity uniform because then they had women in there, and some of them were pregnant.
Wow.
And the lady that donated still lives in the area, and she comes by with her grandchildren, sees her uniform in there.
So this is a maternity, but for pregnant military nurses. So here are these women in the military, still, and they're nurse. What we went through. Oh my gosh! Now I'm going to wonder if I went to the same place. They had.
They have a motorcycle there too that was donated by another soldier later on who lived around the area, I believe, and he was over in, I believe, Czechoslovakia, and he saw these people using this old Harley motorcycle for a water pump. You know how you need to turn your pump, and a motorcycle, you run the motor and the wheel turns, and they were using that as a pump to turn as a motor to turn their pump. And he bought the thing, paid $100 for it, for the old Harley, and donated it to the museum. And they have that in there. And they have a lot of other things in there. The Vietnam War era, the cages that were soldiers were put in when they were taken prisoners sometime. And it's not any one war there. It deals with all of them.
Oh, wow.
But of
Wow,
course,
that's
there's a big
amazing.
emphasis on World War II because, that was our last big war. And the memorial room in the back, it's almost like a little chapel. You just feel kind of reverent, and they have the names of the different ones that died, the Medal of Honor winners and people like that. And then when you come out of the museum is in a building, looks like a big red barn. And out front on the lawn, there's helicopters, ambulances, things that were used during the war. And then when you walk around behind there, that's where the big memorial wall is. And it's very moving. It has all 50 flags of all states. And
wow.
It has famous statues. Henry County was named for Patrick Henry. So, of course, they've got his give me liberty or give me death speech on the wall.
It's interesting
the
about
CBB
this.
person know it by heart.
Oh, that's
the whole
important.
Speech. Yeah,
Wow.
But we've forgotten that because that's so far back. And then Kennedy's words about ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And we've kind of forgotten that too, I think. We've moved away from that and become so divided. But
these are the places that bring you back to what has happened. And when we were leaving, we were in Peachtree City earlier, February this year. And we were driving to Texas, I believe.
Okay.
I don't know.
You could very well have gone through Henry County.
It was east, and there was this memorial park. And we just pulled over because we document all parks, and it includes, memorial sites. And it had a gazebo, and it had like a fountain, and they had a whole wall dedicated to women in World War II. And I thought, wow,
okay, that's a
when do
different
you
one
see
there.
that? Okay.
Not
I have to
often.
look it up in my footage. Yeah. But this was, I couldn't believe it. And they really outdid themselves on the World War II. One thing too that I noticed, and Georgia's really good at this, is a lot of the courthouses, the historic courthouses, have World War II, World War I veterans memorials, like a lot of the town centers, town plaza kind of things. I don't know if you call them a plaza if you're in the Southeast, but it seems the courthouses really were like one of the first places where you will see a veterans memorial that's been put up. And I mean, I can't, we're going to do an actual interactive map on our site because people should see all these sites. I mean, when you start to go to so many of them,
so much.
It's mind blowing.
People will travel overseas so much to Europe, but they don't realize so much that we have here. And so many of the little places. I did a panhandle trip through the Florida Panhandle.
Oh, yeah.
And Colorado Springs was one of them that I was on.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
But one little tiny place is a railroad museum, and I don't remember exactly what city it was in right now, but it's a little railroad museum. But they have a complete, I think it's Washington County, one of the cities in Washington County, have a complete war memorial in there. It's not big, but it's honoring those people from that area who fought in the war. And you see that in so many of these little tiny towns. And it's amazing, the fun, like St. Mark's, the lighthouse. And when I went, the lighthouse was closed, but you could drive out and see it. But these places, most people have never even heard of them. But yet, it's a fantastic trip. I mean, just that one day, within a couple of hours, I'm standing there looking at this little 5-foot alligator lying there right on the sand a few feet away from me. You know what I mean?
I know exactly where you are. There's one dude that hangs out by this bridge on the way to the lighthouse, and he's on the left, like if you're driving to the lighthouse on the left.
As you're driving to the lighthouse, there's a little pull-off. And he's there, right.
That's his thing.
It's probably the same gator.
It's
the one
the
he
same
doesn't
gator.
charge to get his picture taken.
Every time we go there, I'm like, if I want to see a gator, I know that's the site to go to.
And he's not aggressive. He made no move towards me. He just kept watching me. I mean, if I came too close, I think he was heading back in the water.
Yeah.
And you drive out to the lighthouse and
I'm going to send you a photo of this. So everyone, it's war memorials and alligators. I mean, there's no way that Kathleen's coming on the show and we don't talk about alligators. But
alligators, we've got to have alligators.
Yeah, but this is so important. I think, that's what I was saying. All these places we've been, you do feel this remorse, like, God, why did, so many people died in these wars and risked their lives, and the fear they must have still felt, going through this, injured and watching friends go. I mean, there's just so much emotion. And there's places like one of the places that really got me was Fort Polk in Fort Polk, Louisiana. And
Louisiana, I don't think I've been there, come to think of it.
It's on I would say no man's land, so it's on the way to Toledo Bend area. If you're going, it's like really, if you follow the reservoir up, and if you go like Lake Charles up towards Manny, and they have a few memorials there too. And this is a very huge part of World War II history. So it's Kisatchie Forest is really all connected too. Kisatchie is the only national forest in Louisiana, and this is where they did the Louisiana maneuvers using tanks, going through here and learning their tanks.
Yes, I have been to that museum, the Maneuver Museum, and it's on a base.
It's
you go in there, and
there's a memorial.
Certain places you can't take pictures, even you because they're very particular about that. Every place you go, there's something that ties in with that museum. Like Oak Ridge. Have you been to that?
In Oak Ridge, in Tennessee?
Yes. The secret city where they built the nuclear bomb, the first atom bomb.
That's right. It's like one of the atom bomb sites,
right, and
the missile sites that we have, the Manhattan Project, and like we have one in New Mexico.
Right.
Tennessee,
yes. Well, that's White Sands in New Mexico. Yeah, the White Sands to me is more beautiful for the scenery and the beautiful white sands and the people sliding down it on. I didn't try sliding down the sand. They sat on cardboard and things, and they were sliding in there.
But I know you could slide down the side and the sand, and then next thing you know, a rocket goes off behind you because it's the military base is right there.
Yeah.
And some days you can't get in.
Well, that's like Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge, they take you through, and you have to either have a driver's license or if you're from another country, a passport. And they take you through there. And there's certain places where when the bus stops, before you get out, he said, now you cannot point to the right. You can't take pictures there because it is still an active military base.
Wow.
The most interesting thing on that one, we're standing in one place in there, and he's pointing out where they actually, I'm not sure what you would call the room, where they actually processed the uranium, and it became, the division. And you're standing in there, and somebody asked about atomic waste, and he said, "Oh, they're safe. They buried right down under your feet." And we were all looking down like, "Oh,
that's
we're going to start going in the dark."
Yeah, really. I mean, it's weird. I mean, this. If
you haven't been there,
I haven't done that one yet. No, I haven't done that yet. But we've done.
You definitely need to do it. It's really fantastic.
We almost did the one in New Mexico. It was outside Bandelier National Monument. So if you go to Santa Fe, it's near there, Los Alamos.
Right. I went out to White Sands, but what I learned out there, which was a sad thing. There's in Las Cruces, there's a museum of agriculture of all things, and they talk about there's oral history in there, and more than one, but the one that I listened to. The people that were there that own ranches and stuff where White Sands is today were told, we need to use them during the war, we'll give them back to you afterwards. And it never happened after the war. They still kept them. The people never got their land, and very few of them some of them got a little bit of compensation, but never much. And, for some of them, it was family land for generations. And they don't teach us that in history. They never mention little things like that in history.
And that's part of, I think, what's interesting about like Manzanar and stuff, when you go through there.
Yeah, they don't talk about that either.
No, there's just...
We don't want to admit when we made mistakes. And I think a person who can admit they made a mistake and recognize it is a much stronger person than one that tries to pretend they're perfect and never made any mistakes.
However, I think on the flip side of it, we were did not know, and the Japanese were like, when you didn't want to fight the Japanese, you didn't want to be, the POW camps, you didn't want to be in one of those with the Japanese because they were not, especially in like.
Oh no, they treated us horribly too. It was too long, definitely. So when you think about like
if you're like, holy cow, what's going on? We've got to do this. I think everybody just did what they absolutely thought was the most important thing. I mean, even look at the pandemic. 1 minute, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, do this. Oh, don't. I mean, look how it, you just do the utmost you need to. And I think it's sad. It's a really sad part of history, but I get it from the generals and the military leaders. I understand why they went there. Like, I don't think they did it on purpose. You know what I mean? I really don't.
Well,
like, just
so
learning
much
the
of what
history.
government, everything in government, I've worked for government agencies, present day, and it's you follow the rule that's in the book. And the rule may not
Right.
make a bit of sense, but if that's the way it's written,
Yeah.
that's it. That's the rule. And like this lady pointed out, one of the groups that they put on the ships in exile was the Japanese orphanage of children 2 to 5 years old. Obviously, 2 to 5 year old children were not going to be Japanese spies, and 2/3 of the people were American citizens, and a lot of them, the sons were over there fighting for us.
That's why these sites are so important to go to get that connection. And when you're there, like when you go to even the cemeteries, that's the one in Fort Polk. We went to the military cemetery, a graveyard, and there's just a sea of white crosses and tombs, and that just was this, it just brings it home of how many people lose their life through war, and these people who sacrificed. And here's where they are, and you just, we really. Yeah, I mean, I won't forget our time there, and we went with a lady from Leesville, and she's since passed, Marcia, and Marcia, and I say Marcia, but it's Marcia, but she took us out there, and it was, and then next thing you know, like we were talking about everything, and it's very connected to our family, and people have passed. Like, this is a community, this is a very, you know what I mean? It was so personal.
Yeah.
Because she knew people in there that were resting in there, and, could tell stories about them. And by the time we left, I'm like, man, you can't go to these places and not feel something. You better check yourself if you can't, and or don't. And we've got to go to these places and include this as part of our travels to learn this history. History should be part of where we go. These small sites, some of them, these small memorials, are about the place that you're in at that time. These people that served somewhere, whether it's Vietnam, World War I, Korean War, they were somewhere, or Desert Storm.
And those people, each of them has a story. They were all. It's not like a dry history book where such and such happened on such and such a date.
Right.
It's real people. This person had a life and a family, a mother or a child or somebody at home waiting for them, and they never came back.
Exactly.
And that's sad.
I know. So I think it's important that we go and we connect better. And that's, we look for these authentic travel experiences. Well, there's more than getting a cool Instagram photo. I'm just saying, go to these places, really finding the true history, connecting with it will leave you just with a bigger heart and a more open mind and more understanding about how things happen in the world. So it's I'm really glad you came on to talk about these places, Kathleen. It's
well,
really
I've enjoyed it. I always enjoy talking with you. It's more like just talking to a friend than it is doing a radio show. So I enjoy it very much. Thank you.
Next time we'll see you when we get to Florida, and we'll have wine and kayak with gators.
Give me a call and we'll get together.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Everyone, you can keep up with Kathleen at AmericanRoads.net. Of course, her story is up on blendradioandtv.com. Just look in the history section and watch for it to come out in our Way Back When History magazine. And we also want to thank the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. We love them. We love our segments with all these writers and destinations. Keep up with them at ifwtwa.org. Again, every second Tuesday and every second Friday is when we do these shows. Kathleen, where's your next destination before you go?
I'm going to MAPRA in State College, Pennsylvania, in just a couple of weeks.
Oh, nice. Well, enjoy Pennsylvania. Awesome.
I will.
You got to learn how to do the polka.
I'm sure I'll learn something. I'm not sure if it'll be the polka, but it'll be something.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.